The night my grandmother died, she asked everyone else to leave the room. The oxygen machine hummed. Her fingers, papery and cold, tightened around my wrist with surprising strength. She leaned close enough that I could smell the antiseptic on her breath and whispered, "Truth has a long memory." Then she glanced at the sealed envelope on the bedside table, my name written on it in her shaky hand, and smiled like she knew something I didn't. I wouldn't open it yet. Not for a long time. This was a story about patience, about vindication, about protection that hides until the moment it's needed. I was 25 then. Umala. Born and raised in a town so small it only needed one stoplight, and even that blinked like it was embarrassed to exist. In places like that, everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. Stories pass through diner booths faster than facts. Rumors don't just travel. They settle, root, become history. I'd learned early that reputation mattered more than reality. If the town decided who you were, you could scream the truth until your throat bled, and it wouldn't matter. My parents understood that better than anyone. Living in their house felt like being slowly buried alive. Every mistake was remembered. Every disagreement was recorded. They framed it as concern, as guidance, as love. But it was control. I worked part-time at the grocery store, saving every spare dollar in a jar under my bed, counting days instead of money. Leaving wasn't just a dream. It was survival. Still I was stuck. Geography had me trapped, and so did my last name. Around here, being someone's daughter mattered more than being yourself. The accusation came on a Tuesday, ordinary enough to be cruel. My mother stood in the kitchen holding her purse upside down, receipts spilling across the counter like evidence. Her eyes locked onto me. "You took it," she said flatly. Not a question. A verdict. I laughed at first, then stopped when I saw she wasn't joking. I told her I hadn't touched her money. I showed her my wallet. I begged her to check again. My voice cracked. I felt 12 years old, not 20-5. My father didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why. He just leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and said, "If you think you're so grown up, face the world on your own." That's when I understood this was never about missing cash. It was about reminding me who had power. Truth was irrelevant. Obedience wasn't point. 2 days later, my manager called me into the back office at the grocery store. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He said something about restructuring, about trust, about it not being personal. When he slid my final paycheck across the desk, his hand shook. As I walked out, my coworker Jenna caught my sleeve and whispered, "Your parents were here. They told him you weren't reliable." The word hit harder than a slap. Untrustworthy. From the people who were supposed to protect me. Home, my father said it like a lesson. Low. Deliberate. "Maybe now you'll learn to respect us." He repeated it, savoring each word like he wanted it burned into me. That sentence didn't just hurt. It branded. Followed me. It became a curse stamped onto my name. Something other people could feel even if they didn't know where it came from. Parenting, they called it. Teaching humility. I called it psychological warfare. That wasn't the end. It was the system beginning to work. Every job application followed the same pattern. Mail. Encouragement. "We'll be in touch." Then silence. Or a polite rejection email that felt rehearsed. Once, an interviewer slipped. She lowered her voice and said, "We heard some concerning things about your honesty." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. The room tilted. It wasn't random. It was coordinated. I went home shaking, anger tangled with fear, and confronted them. My father didn't deny it. He crossed his arms, nodded once, and said, "It was for your own good. Humiliation would make you obedient." Then he said the line again. Slower. Crueler. "Maybe now you'll learn to respect us." They believed destroying me was discipline. That breaking me would rebuild me in their image. 2 years passed like that. The 2 years that followed blurred into a single grinding nightmare. I watched my savings shrink with the kind of focus usually reserved for medical charts, tracking decline, predicting collapse. At night, I lay awake doing math in my head, calculating how long I could survive on instant noodles if I skipped one meal every other day. Every penny had a purpose. Every grocery item was weighed against rent, against gas, against the unspoken fear of what would happen when the numbers finally hit zero. The isolation came quietly. Friends stopped calling, not out of cruelty but convenience. Costs money to exist socially. Some of them believed the rumors anyway. They didn't confront me. They just drifted. I learned something brutal in that time. Once the word thief sticks to you, it becomes your shadow. It follows you into rooms you've never been in before. It introduces you when you're not there. Worse than the hunger or the loneliness was what it did to my mind. I started replaying the accusation over and over, searching for some invisible flaw. Was I really the problem? Did I deserve this punishment? Shame has a way of sounding reasonable when you hear it long enough. My parents' voices began to live in my head, narrating my failures. The audience for my life had turned hostile, and I'd started to believe the reviews. The only person who never looked at me differently was my grandmother. She'd raised me in pieces. Long stretches when my parents were too busy, when love was outsourced to someone patient enough to give it freely. With her, I was never a disappointment or a lesson. I was just Pamela. She had this way of listening that made you feel like the truth was safe to come out. She used to say, "Truth has a long memory, even when people pretend to forget." At the time it sounded like comfort. I didn't realize it was prophecy. When she got sick, I sat by her bed after work, counting the beeps of the machines instead of money. On her last night, she squeezed my hand with more strength than she should have had and said, "No matter what they say about you, remember who you are." I nodded, not understanding how literal those words would become. When she died, something in me went quiet. The one person who truly saw me was gone, and the world felt colder without a witness. By the time I was 25, I was exhausted. Not the kind sleep fixes. The kind that hollows you out slowly, carefully, until there's nothing left to scrape. I moved through days on autopilot, doing what needed to be done without expecting anything good to follow. It felt like the end of the road, the moment just before people give up and call it fate. Then last week, something finally changed. A mid-sized logistics company just outside town called to schedule an interview. I almost didn't go. Experience had taught me not to hope. Hope had become dangerous, expensive. Still, I ironed my blazer, practiced answers in the mirror, and told myself it was just another attempt. Nothing more. No expectations meant no disappointment. I drove there like someone heading into a storm they'd survived too many times before. The HR manager smiled, asked routine questions, nodded at my answers. My chest tightened anyway. I waited for the familiar turn, the moment my parents' poison would surface. Every question felt like a trap. Then the door opened. The room shifted instantly. "This is our CEO," the HR manager said. He looked at me, then at the envelope in his hand. "Before we start, I need to give you this. Your grandmother left it with strict instructions." For a moment, I was sure I'd misheard him. My grandmother had been gone for years. The words didn't fit reality. The CEO noticed the confusion on my face and reached into his briefcase. When he pulled out the envelope, the room seemed to tilt. It was thick, yellowed with age. The edges softened like it had been handled many times. My hands trembled before I even touched it. There was a date written on the front in careful looping handwriting. 15 years ago. My chest tightened. The air felt heavy, unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. My parents' voices flooded back. The accusations, the punishments, the years of quiet rejection, all crashing together inside me. I couldn't reconcile the timeline. I couldn't reconcile the intent. The audience in my head went silent. I didn't open it yet. Instead, something unfamiliar rose in my chest. Not fear. Not shame. Quiet certainty. The kind that doesn't ask questions because it already knows the answer. Truth finally was catching up. The CEO didn't rush me. He sat back, hands folded, giving me space like this moment belonged to me alone. When I broke the seal, the sound felt louder than it should have. Paper tearing, a curse cracking. Inside, several documents lay neatly arranged. On top was a handwritten letter. One glance at the script and my throat closed. I would have recognized that handwriting anywhere. She wrote that she had seen this moment coming. 15 years ago, she had looked at her son and his wife and understood them in a way no one else wanted to. Their need for control. Their hunger to feel powerful. Their willingness to sacrifice their own child's reputation to keep it. She said she was afraid, not of what they might say to me, but of what they might say about me. Afraid they would one day try to erase me socially and financially, so she prepared. This wasn't anger on paper. It was calm. Methodical. She explained that she had spent years quietly documenting patterns, saving proof, asking questions that sounded innocent at the time. She didn't call it revenge. She called it insurance. Reading her words felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. She hadn't fought them loudly. She'd outlived their strategy. The documents beneath the letter told the rest of the story. Notarized statements. Transcripts of recorded conversations. Sworn affidavits from people I hadn't thought about in years. Former neighbors who remembered my parents warning others about me. Old employers who'd been pressured with concerns. Even a distant cousin who once worked with my father and heard him brag about keeping me in line. It wasn't one incident. It was a campaign. A deliberate effort to poison my name wherever it might matter. The CEO spoke then. His voice steady. My grandmother had been an early investor, back when the company was nothing but a risky idea and a stubborn dream. She'd earned the board's respect long before I ever walked into that room. She'd left the documents with them, along with explicit instructions. If I ever applied for a position and was rejected for character concerns, they were to intervene, to verify, to protect. We did, he said simply. Your reputation was damaged deliberately. We verified everything. Power shifted in that moment. Not because someone punished my parents, but because someone believed me without hesitation. Because an institution chose truth over gossip. Because the powerless were finally backed by something solid. There was more. A trust fund. Quiet. Untouched. Set aside in my name and hidden carefully from my parents. Not enough to make me rich, but enough to make me safe. Enough to ensure that if they ever succeeded in leaving me with nothing, I wouldn't fall through the cracks. In her letter she'd written, "This is not revenge, Pamela. This is protection." Broke then. Tears blurred the words, the room, the years of doubt that had convinced me I was worthless. For 2 years, I'd believed I deserved what was happening. And all that time, someone had believed in me so deeply they planned for my worst day. Long before it arrived. The CEO slid a folder across the table. "We're offering you the position," he said. "Not out of sympathy. Because you deserve a clean start." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. When I walked out of that building, I felt lighter than I had in years. But the story didn't end there. News travels fast in small towns, especially the kind my parents love. It didn't take long for people to notice the change. Questions started circulating in the same places the rumors once lived. The diner, the hardware store, the church parking lot. Why was Pamela suddenly working at a respected company? Why did the CEO personally escort her on her first day? The whispers shifted direction. Curiosity replaced suspicion. And for the first time, my parents weren't the ones steering the story. Small-town gossip cuts both ways. And the blade had turned. Then the truth came out. The company's legal team moved with the same quiet precision my grandmother had planned years earlier. Formal notices went out to every employer my parents had contacted. Each letter was direct, factual, devastating. The accusations against me were false and documented as malicious defamation. Some employers reached out to apologize, their voices tight with embarrassment. Others avoided me entirely, unable to face their own complicity. Silence, I learned, can be an admission to them why parents couldn't hide from it. They were called in by a lawyer. I wasn't there, but I heard how it went. My father tried to laugh it off at first, the way men do when they think confidence can outrun consequences. Then they played the recording. His voice filled the room. Casual, cruel, unmistakable. "Tell them she steals. She needs to learn respect. The same sentence that had ruined my life collapsed his credibility in seconds. He went quiet. My mother cried. Power drained out of the room, leaving them exposed in a way they'd never allowed themselves to be. For the first time, they weren't controlling the narrative. They tried to reach me after that. Messages. Showing up unannounced at my apartment like nothing had changed. I didn't answer. I didn't need a confrontation or an apology shaped to save face. I didn't need closure from them. What I had instead was proof, dignity, and a future that finally belonged to me. Moving forward was the loudest statement I could make, that I think often about how close I came to giving up. How easy it would have been to believe their version of me forever. My grandmother understood something my parents never did. Real respect is earned through love, not fear. She played the long game, trusting that truth would wait until I was ready to receive it. Her strength was quiet. Theirs was loud and brittle. Love protected. Control destroyed. Now, when I walk through town, people look at me differently. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. Even admiration. I pass the stores that once rejected me and remember the curse my father tried to stamp onto my life. Maybe now you'll learn to respect us. He thought he was writing my ending, he was only setting up the beginning. They thought they were writing my ending. Every accusation, every whisper, every closed door was meant to funnel me into a corner where I'd have no choice but to crawl back and submit. What they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that my grandmother had already written a better ending. One that didn't rely on luck or timing or mercy. One built quietly, patiently. Long before the crisis even began. That's the irony. My parents' attempt to control my life became the blueprint for their own undoing. Their cruelty exposed itself the moment light touched it. Meanwhile, my grandmother's love, soft-spoken, unshowy, became my salvation. She saw her son's nature clearly. She didn't argue with it. She planned around it. Love that anticipates will always outlast control that reacts. There are lessons buried in this story that took me years to understand. First, truth doesn't need to defend itself immediately. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait. Patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. Lies burn fast. Truth keeps its shape. Second, real protection comes from those who genuinely love you. Sometimes that's family. Sometimes it's the one person who shows up when others don't. Found family isn't always who you expect, but it's always who proves it. Third, abusers survive by controlling the narrative. Once that control breaks, their power evaporates. They don't fall because they're confronted. They fall because they're exposed. Fourth, institutions aren't always villains. Sometimes they work exactly as they should. A company honored my grandmother's wishes. A CEO used his position not to look away, but to correct a wrong. Justice doesn't always come from courts or shouting. It can come from systems choosing integrity. Fifth, you don't need your abuser's closure. I didn't need my parents to understand me. I didn't need apologies shaped to protect their pride. I had something better, proof, freedom, and a future that no longer required their permission. And finally, small-town judgment isn't objective truth. The same community that once shunned me now watches with curiosity, even respect. Social proof is fickle. Self-worth has to be internal, or it can always be taken away. The center of all this was strategic love, and why grandmother didn't just comfort me when things were hard. She protected my future. 15 years of forethought. Legal documents prepared. Evidence gathered quietly. Financial safety net created. Strategic partnerships formed with people who had real power. She didn't want me to need her forever. She wanted me to be free without her. That was the difference. Why parents called control love and demanded obedience. My grandmother called love preparation and offered protection. They wanted me dependent. She wanted me self-sufficient, and the sentence that once haunted me, the curse meant to break me, became the final proof of who they really were. Maybe now you'll learn to respect us. Those words, recorded and played back, didn't teach me submission. They taught everyone else exactly what kind of people my parents were. The weapon they used against me became the weapon that ended their control. Poetic justice in its purest form. They taught me about respect, just not the way they intended. I learned it comes from character, not feared. If this story moved you, if you believe that patience, truth, and quiet strength always win in the end, don't forget to subscribe to Dark Revenge. Because the best stories of justice aren't loud. They aren't rushed. They take time to unfold. Truth has a long memory. And it always comes back.